Would you come sit right here for me?
So you said when you were sitting in the car you heard something?
I heard something, so I thought it was a train.
Where did it sound like it was coming from?
Yeah, it was like going like zzz. Like somebody was lasering somebody.
Like somebody was lasering something?
Is he big like me or little like you?
He's tall.
He's tall.
This is 5-year-old Xenia Jackson, captured a few days before the events described. Tonight, her mother was found dead alongside her longtime girlfriend on a remote island near Houston, Texas. During an interview, the little girl reported seeing a stranger entering her house that morning, but detectives dismissed her account. They instead became convinced that the victim's own father was responsible for the double murder.
This is your daughter. What happened?
That's what we trying to find out. I don't want y'all to look at me as a suspect.
Why would somebody want to do this to me?
I've been asking myself that question too.
It was surprising that the detectives would consider him a suspect. The father attempted to reason with them, but the lieutenant in charge of the investigation was unmoved. In just about 10 seconds, he was going to snap at him.
She had the supreme beat out of her. Brittany had her brains beat in. You explain that. You can explain it. Look at this camera and show some remorse.
Do you remember that day, Xenia?
Yeah.
Tell me what you remember.
Houston, Texas, March 18, 2014. Police are at the home of Reverend Ivan Jackson and his wife Mary, delivering devastating news about the disappearance of their 24-year-old daughter, Crystal. In the next room, Crystal's 5-year-old daughter, Cynthia, hears her grandparents sobbing.
911, what's your emergency?
I have 2 dead people at the back of my store by my dumpster.
When they told me that my baby was dead, it hurted me. I'd never been hurt as bad as I was hurt that day.
Are they male or female, could you tell?
One appears to be a woman.
I never dreamed that I would have to bury my own child. I couldn't do nothing but go in the house and hug my granddaughter.
On the other side of the city, Brittany's aunt, Ebony McQueen, is preparing to head out when she notices her phone has received an unusually large number of notifications.
I remember just getting dressed, and I just happened to go to Facebook, and I had messages galore. I'm like, what's going on? Clicked on one of the messages, and he was just like, say, friend, I think they found your niece and her girlfriend dead.
Stunned by what she was reading, Ebony turned on the news on her TV.
I went to Channel 13, and that was the first face I seen was her and Crystal.
Murder mystery tonight on the Bolivar Peninsula.
How the women were killed remains a mystery. Both were African American and homosexual. Many believe the women were targeted because of their sexual orientation.
I was just numb. And I just remember calling my brother, and I'm like, what happened?
Brittany's father, James Cosby, had barely begun to process the information when Ebony called him a few hours before the story broke in the news. The police had already visited his home to inform him of his daughter's passing.
What's going on? Are you the father? Brittany's dad? Yes. Yeah. Sit down, Bill. Please sit down. Yeah, just have a seat.
Brittany's dad.
What happened?
That's what we're trying to find out.
What happened?
You grieve all you agree. We understand. Right now, we want to find out who did this. Okay.
Who's the girl with Brittany? Real thin, but
That's her girlfriend.
okay.
That's her girlfriend. That's Crystal.
It is Crystal.
The cause of their deaths remained under investigation. However, it was clear that Brittany, James's daughter, and Crystal's girlfriend had been violently assaulted. The police suspected the crime was driven by hatred toward the women as they began questioning their families. They were shocked to discover that even Crystal's father, Ivan Jackson, opposed the relationship.
I used to tell my daughter, I say, you ain't gay, you damn straight, because she just experimenting on something. She don't know what she get into.
So you never even would let Brittany come in the house?
When she come in the house, she go sit right there where you sitting.
Okay.
I told my daughter, I say, look, that girl gonna be the cause of your death.
As a fervent preacher in a Baptist church, his religious beliefs conflicted with his daughter's identity, and he was unafraid to express this to the police when they brought his family in for questioning.
Tell us a little bit about your daughter.
I love my daughter. It's hard. I didn't like her changing her sexual orientation, but it was nothing I could do because she was grown. I told Crystal that lesbian stuff would take her out of here. I knew it.
I accepted it, but he couldn't. It brought friction between both of them.
Ivan's strong convictions and his insistence that Crystal's sexuality was the cause of her death alarmed the officers, who began to suspect him. Concerned, he permitted them to question Xenia, who had been with Brittany and Crystal on the day they disappeared. An officer promptly took the little girl to another room.
Would you come sit right here for me?
Do you like to color? Zanaya, what is the first thing you do when you get to school?
Eat breakfast.
Tell me everything that happened from that morning to the time you went to sleep.
The morning when I was getting ready for school at nighttime, my mama was in the car, me and her. My mama said, stay in the car, and I stayed in the car, so I was taking my mom's on off.
Even at just 5 years old, Cynthia sensed that something was wrong. However, the police were unsure if she truly grasped what had happened that morning, until Xenia began recounting an encounter she had with a potential suspect.
I heard something, so I thought it was a stranger. So I just sit it back. I just had my seatbelt on. I waited like this so the stranger wouldn't see me.
Confused by the new information, the police continued their investigation, even though they were aware that something significant had occurred the day before Brittany and Crystal's disappearance. The girls had visited the Jackson residence to pick up Xenia and show off the new car they had bought together, but the situation quickly went awry.
She wanted me to come out to see her new car. Me being as stubborn as I am, I wouldn't even get up out the chair.
After the argument, Crystal left with Brittany and Xenia. Her mother tried calling her repeatedly to resolve things, but Crystal never answered. Later that day, Ivan, feeling something was amiss, took action. He grabbed his .25 caliber handgun and went to the Cosby's house.
My husband said he was gonna go to the house and see what was going on. And if Brittany did something to Crystal, he was gonna do something to her. But I told him, no, leave the gun at home.
Fortunately, Mary was able to talk him out of going.
Ivan said that he never actually went to the Cosby residence. He never made contact with Crystal.
As the days passed and the investigation stalled, the detective finally received the autopsy reports. Crystal had been killed by a gunshot wound, while Brittany had suffered from blunt force trauma. Despite their hopes that Ivan was lying, the ballistic report told a different story. The bullet that killed his daughter was of a higher caliber than Ivan's own gun. Now cleared of suspicion, Ivan couldn't help but reflect on why the police had been so convinced he was the perpetrator.
I carry a lot of guilt in me because the things I should have said to my daughter, I didn't say when I had the chance. Watching them put my baby in that vault and have to leave her at that cemetery. Was the hardest thing that ever happened to me. I took plenty of bodies to the cemetery, but I never had to leave a child at the cemetery.
Tragically, both funerals were scheduled for the same day, separating the couple even in death. Although their significant others were not mentioned during the services, those who truly knew them understood the depth of their love for each other.
You can tell they loved each other. You can tell that they cared about the well-being of Crystal's daughter.
She derived a lot of joy and purpose from the family she was building with Crystal and their daughter.
I think Brittany really, really in love with Crystal. You know, she wants to get married. You know, she wants to be with Crystal forever.
With Crystal, everybody loved her. She would give you the shirt off her back. She was an amazing girl. She was. God, I miss her so much.
Brittany was very outgoing. She loved family time. She loved movies. She loved pickles. She loved to laugh. The biggest question was who did it? Because I was just like, who will harm her? You're angry, but you're hurt at the same time. So it's like, I just wanted to get to the bottom of what happened.
With Ivan cleared as a suspect, investigators found themselves back at square one.
We would have a theory, and then you come across something that totally throws a monkey wrench into that. So you're starting completely over.
As the case progressed, detectives uncovered new evidence, including a bloody fingerprint and CCTV footage of the women's car on the night they vanished.
The guard stopped this vehicle. As he's talking to the driver steps out of the car.
They were stunned to discover that neither Brittany nor Crystal was behind the wheel.
You can tell the person's height, you can tell the build. It was a male person, but the camera's so far away you can't see a detailed face.
One thing was certain to them. Despite Xenia's claim that a stranger entered her house while she waited in the car, the autopsy report led the police to a different conclusion.
Her skull was actually broken open. She was not only hit once in the forehead, but 4 extra times in the back of the head. It was definitely our feeling that it was overkill.
It took somebody with such great force to break her neck with that blow that we knew it had to be anger. It had to be personal.
Detective Kitchens, a rookie handling his first homicide case, was convinced that whatever Xenia witnessed was real. He therefore brought Brittany's father, James Cosby, the only other person present that morning, to the sheriff's office for questioning.
You told me last you saw Brittany was Wednesday night?
No.
Thursday morning?
Yeah.
What time did Crystal Brittany do?
The same time they usually leave every morning. It was like just a normal morning. Nothing was out of the ordinary.
James appeared to be honest, but Kitchens was puzzled. Why did Brittany and Crystal leave without taking Zendaya to school that morning?
That's the one thing that's out of the order.
I was trying to figure it out.
That's because if normally they would take her to school, but yet they left her there that morning. No, man, I know you're doing the best you can. And as things come up, you know you got my number, so call anytime.
The following day, a week after the murders, James's family joined hundreds of grieving locals in downtown Houston for a statewide memorial.
It was being held to honor Brittany and Crystal because there had been a lot of public grief over what had happened to them.
The murder in Galveston hit close to home across Texas. Ceremonies like this one are being held in Dallas, Corpus Christi, and here in Austin.
People across Texas expressed their sympathy for James, Ebony, Ivan, Mary, and the newly orphaned Xenia.
Photos of Britney Cosby and Crystal Jackson are surrounded by flowers and glowing lights.
You can't really put something like this in the word. Britney's a good shirt. Shirt my baby.
On that same day, Kitchens and his partner visited the Cosby home. He planned to question James further and possibly speak with Annie Lee, Brittany's great-grandmother.
Once we get to Houcher Street, James Cosby is actually at a vigil, so we speak with a caretaker that's watching Annie Lee Cosby.
Annie Lee's cousin, Coral, who had been helping around the house for a few years, was questioned by Kitchens about any suspicious activity in the past week. Coral slowly exited the house, closed the door behind her, and asked the detectives to follow her to the carport. Sensing she had something important to reveal, Kitchens took out his recorder.
And I looked around, I noticed that the carport was spotlessly clean. And I had never seen it clean before, never. Even though I had had my grandkids to move trash out of there, it was always debris, something that needed to be cleaned up.
As Kitchens scanned the carport, he saw nothing out of the ordinary until his gaze fell on a pile of small bricks on the concrete floor.
Why would there be 5 bricks laying here in the carport? There's got to be a purpose for them being there. And what I saw just took my breath away. There was what appeared to be 4 to 5 drops of blood on the ground. I immediately began to look even closer at that point, which is when I noticed 2 more drops of blood up near the door facing. That led me to believe that we may be standing in our crime scene.
Unaware of the discovery at his home, James Cosby remained at the memorial, responding to local news inquiries and commending the detectives for their hard work.
We need to find out what's happening. The detectives are doing what they do. They've been keeping us informed as much as they can, but there's nothing yet.
Towards the end of the vigil, Kitchens and his partner, Sergeant Kilburn, arrived and arrested James in front of the crowd. They then took him into custody.
They ended up picking him up at the vigil. This is not looking good for Mr. Cosby.
After the arrest, Kilburn returned to the scene and forced open the garage where James had been staying. Using his UV light, he was astonished by what he uncovered.
Everywhere we were looking, we were finding something with blood on it. On the carpet, on the couch, on clothes that were in the room.
Back at the station, Kitchens and his lieutenant were briefed on the situation. They now felt they had sufficient evidence to confront James.
Were you aware that we were back at the house today?
Today?
Can you explain to me why or how in your room where you stay that carpet throughout that room and furniture throughout that room is saturated with fresh blood? You've been in that room, sleeping in that room, with your daughter's blood on the carpet.
I ain't seen no stain. I would see some stain.
She had the supreme beat out of her.
And it's all over your room.
Brittany had her brains beat in.
It wasn't long before Lieutenant Hanson's patience was pushed to its breaking point. He found it impossible to endure James's cold and emotionless reactions.
You can explain that. You can explain it. That's your daughter's head smashed in, thrown away like a garbage.
This continued for over 5 hours. During that time, forensic scientists matched the bloody fingerprints found near the dumpsters to James. Gradually, the evidence began to close in on the suspect.
Everything points back to James Larry Cosby Jr. And you expect us to believe that James Larry Cosby Jr. don't know? You need to man up. Finish a sentence for me. I'm going to start a sentence. I want you to finish it.
What is it?
I did not do this because...
I'm not finished with that.
What are you going to tell us?
Not
Okay. We done?
We're done.
Stand up. Hey, run back.
James was initially charged only with tampering with evidence, as his fingerprints matched those found at the dump site. Without more clues, he faced the possibility of a short sentence. Meanwhile, Ivan began appearing on the news, discussing Crystal's passing and how Xenia was coping with the loss.
I come home in the evening, my daughter's not there. I look at her daughter. Sometimes her daughter has nightmares, so we have her in counseling now.
This was when the detectives' understanding sharpened, now that they had more details. The story began to make sense. The stranger mentioned in her initial interview was likely James Cosby, who had recently returned to his family. They asked Ivan to bring her back to the station for a second interview, focusing on her observations and recollections to see if they aligned with the evidence they had gathered.
Did you ever hear anything from his room? Tell me everything you heard from his room.
A gunshot.
You heard a gunshot. Tell me how you know it was a gunshot.
Because he just, in his room, he just said, he took them to outside and just shoot them.
Okay, did somebody tell you that or did you see that?
I see that.
When Tanya left the car to search for her mother, she must have entered James's room, seen the blood, and then made the connection after learning that Brittany and her mother had been murdered.
There was blood splatter in his room.
Okay, tell me where the blood splatter was in his room.
On his bed.
You saw it on his bed? Okay, did you see it anywhere else?
On his floor.
Some on his floor?
He just decided to kill my mother and his daughter.
Based on what Xenia had told me, I hypothesized that Crystal took Xenia, placed her into the car. At the same time, on the inside of the house, James Cosby and Brittany Cosby became involved in a physical altercation, at which time James Cosby snapped and beat Brittany to death. Crystal walked back into the house and was watching this take place and immediately ran out the side door to the back of the vehicle, which is where James Cosby, we believe, caught up with her and then shot her in the head.
All along, 5-year-old Xenia Jackson was the key. Though she may not have fully grasped the events of that morning, she could place James at the scene with the weapon in hand, attacking her mother. A month later, the police discovered Brittany and Crystal's car abandoned in a parking lot, with the trunk soaked in blood. They also found a bullet lodged in the luggage rack in Texas. While proving motive isn't necessary for murder cases, interviews with family members and those close to the Cosbys led detectives to conclude that the conflict began when Brittany and Crystal bought their new car together.
Annie Lee Cosby had changed her will and left everything to Brittany because Brittany was already taking care of everything while her dad was not present in the residence.
He had asked Annie to co-sign for a vehicle, and she'd refused. And then she turned around and co-signed a vehicle for Brittany and Crystal. And it starts to paint a picture of jealousy, pure jealousy.
Today in court, it was a tale of two fathers, one sentenced to life behind bars, and the other choosing a life of forgiveness. Today, Jackson's father, Reverend Ivan Jackson, attended what would be the last hearing in the case of his daughter's murder.
Me and my wife and my church family, we have been praying for life without a possibility of parole instead of the death penalty, because killing him is not going to bring either one of them back.
And his prayers were answered. Cosby was convicted of capital murder, an automatic sentence of life without parole.
No matter what the situation was, they didn't deserve to die. It's been really tough, but on the same token, that it has made me much stronger, because I know I have a responsibility to do now, and that's raise my grandbaby.
It was, I cried. It's a relief. What we did for those families.
After the case was closed, Ivan and Mary were awarded full custody of Xenia, and Detective Kitchens became her godfather. Each year, they commemorate the anniversaries of Crystal and Brittany's deaths with members of the Jackson family. Although it remains challenging,
it's still tough. I still struggle with Crystal not here. Matter of fact, on Friday I went to visit Crystal grave and Brittany grave. Therefore, when I go to put flowers on Crystal grave, me and my wife put flowers on Brittany grave.
I still have a hard time accepting it a little bit, I guess you could say. I'm angry.
Admiringly, Xenia, now a teenager, found the inner strength to grow from the experience.
How often do you think about Mom?
Almost every day. What comes to mind, I just think of her smile.
Admiringly, Xenia, now a teenager, found the inner strength to grow from the experience.
What do you think you might want to do?
I want to be a lawyer.
What kind of lawyer?
I want to work with the family against the criminal.
What made you want to do that?
My mom.
So you want to be able to help other families the way attorneys helped yours?
Yeah.
Today, she hopes that anyone experiencing violence and loss can find comfort in knowing that every cloud has a silver lining, no matter what happens.
It's okay. Think about the bright side of it, you know? If your parent was killed, you are the reason that everybody can be happy because they have you. You're like the seed. Like if you cut down a tree, you're the seed that fell on the ground. Wow. So it just sprouts up and you look just like them.
That's beautiful.
Elisa knew she and her children had to escape, but Trevor lingered around the house for weeks, never leaving and keeping a close watch on her at all times. When he finally went to work, Elisa immediately contacted a domestic violence organization. She took the kids to a shelter for abused women and filed for divorce. Although they shared custody, she still had to see him and allow the kids to visit. In February 2017, Trevor invited Elisa to his house to sign the divorce paperwork with a notary present. Elisa hoped this meant